Alright, so in the previous video, you have learned how to prepare your working environment for productive and frictionless use of Docker. In this tutorial, we are going to get our hands dirty and learn everything that is important to know when working with containers. Now, as we know, containers are the fundamental building block of the Docker toolkit, and that's one of the first things we are going to learn. We're not going to just build images or do any advanced stuff right now until we have learned about containers. So let's see how do we run them. Now a little bit about how they're different from VM and other basic functionality of a container. We are going to talk about that a bit later. Now the very first thing that we want to understand and we want to be clear that in order to run container, we need to ensure that we have the latest version of Docker and it's working. So let's see that. Now if you followed my previous video, we saw that we are running a container, and in this case we are using a Linux machine in order to run a container. So we are going to install the container right away, and to do that we are going to follow the same thing. We are going to go to get.docker.com in order to install our container, or I would say in order to install the Docker in this Linux machine. So the very first thing we are going to do is we are going to install Docker on this new machine that we have. And in order to do that, we are going to curl the script that we have seen in the previous tutorial, and then we are going to run the script. So for that, we will do a sudo and we'll paste and run the script, and it's going to take a few seconds to install the Docker. As you see, Docker is getting installed here. Alright, so we have the Docker installed in our machine, and now we need to make sure that Docker is a part of our user group, so that we'll add it, and we will do a sudo usermod -a g docker and my username, which is Ubuntu in this case. And that's it. Our Docker is all set to go. So let's check the Docker version. And we see that it is there. If I do a sudo, you can see we have the Docker here running. So we'll do an exit here quickly, and we'll log in again, and we will see a Docker version, and that's it. That means our Docker client is installed, and so is our Docker Engine community version. Now in this tutorial, we are going to learn how to manage different aspects of a container, that is starting it, stopping it, deleting it, creating it, that sort of stuff. And we are going to use Nginx for all of that. Nginx is a really basic web server that is going to be easy for us to use just to learn the Docker commands and how to do Docker container stuff. Now, in order for a Docker command to work, you need to make sure you are in the proper terminal for your operating system. For example, I'm using the Linux, so I'll just use the Linux shell. Now, if you are in case you're using Mac, you can using the terminal or iterm2, or if you're in Windows, you can use Docker for Windows and use PowerShell to run it. Now, if you're Docker Toolbox, you will use the Quick Start terminal that comes with the Docker Toolbox. So depending upon the kind of operating system, you can log into the Docker CLI. Now, the very first command that we will actually learn in this case is the Docker version. Now, this command is simply returning the version of your client, that's the CLI that we just used, and the server, also called as engine, and this engine is running in the background of your machine. Now on Windows, it's usually called as a service. On Mac and Linux, it's called a daemon. So you can also find it a lot of time as a Docker daemon. And what is happening here is our Docker command line is actually talking to the server on my machine and then returning its values as well as the client values itself. Now, one thing is very, very important to point out here, that you should always ensure that you are using the latest version of Docker. In this case, our Docker engine version is 19.03.8. Now, one thing to point out here again, that sometimes you might find that you're not able to get the exact output from the Docker version command. So please ensure that you have added Docker to the sudo group so that it can run as a sudo. Because Docker runs and leverages the system components, it needs to run as a sudo. Now, once you have verified that you have the correct Docker version, you are going to think that what all are the commands that we can use in Docker, and you can get a list of those commands by just typing Docker and press enter. So if you do a Docker, press enter, you will see the list of commands that you can run in Docker itself. Now this is not a full list of commands, because if you see on the top, we have these management commands. So in the early 2017, Docker realized that they are getting so many commands down here in this list, where I would just type Docker space and then the command, that there were so many of them that they needed to create an easier way to organize all of these commands. That's when they created the management commands, and that creates a format where you have Docker space the management command and then the sub command you want to use. So we'll see that through the tutorial how will that work. So let's now play with some Docker commands and see how those actually work out. Okay, so now let's take an example. Here we are going to run Docker container run. Now this command is a new format of that command, but since the beginning of Docker project, we have used Docker run for that purpose. Docker run. Now it has been usually the way we type that command. It's just that recently Docker container run has become the new way to run that command. Now the very cool thing about Docker is that it really focused on the backward compatibility. So the Docker commands that will receive with Docker run will probably work forever, but the new commands that we are not going to be using this Docker command value. It will be using Docker space command space sub value. So each time I'm going to use these commands, I will explain what they are, and I will show you possibly the old way of doing it and obviously the new way of doing it, depending upon whether the command has that option or not. This is where we have hub.docker.com, and here we can find all the repositories or registries of a specific image that we really want to check out. So here, if I am going to search, let's say Nginx, we're going to see a lot of Nginx images here. You can see we have an official build of Nginx, and then we have Nginx for other users also. So this is where the Docker registries of a specific images are stored. Okay, so now we're going to start a new container and use some Docker commands to manage that specific container. So we are going to run Docker container run in this case, and we will actually publish it to a port 80 in this case. So we are saying that, hey, publish the Nginx to this, and let's do that. It's going to install and run the image, install, or you can say download the image from the registry. And you see my container is running, and we can really check it right away by going to the browser. If I go to my browser and just put in the IP address of my machine, you will see that we have successfully run a Nginx container. You can see it says welcome to Nginx, and if you go back to our terminal, you can see the logs of this specific hit is coming. So if I go back here and again refresh it, you can see there is one more log which is coming. That means my container in this case is running successfully, and that's how easy it is to run a container in Docker. Now what is happening in this case, that the container we just ran, it's running in the foreground. Now if I hit Control C and let's go back, press an up arrow, and in this case I am going to write --detach and run the container again. Now what you see that we get back a unique container ID of our container, and every time you run a new container, you get a new unique ID for that. So if we go back to a browser again and let's go to a new tab and refresh it again, you will see that we still have the container running, but this time this container is not the one that we previously ran. This new container has a new ID altogether. Now, how do you see what container is running? So in order to do that, we can actually run docker container ls, and you can see that we have this container which is running in this case. We have a container ID. Let me make the screen a bit bigger so that we have the right information, or make it completely bigger so you can see. Yeah, so you can see that we have a container which is running here right now. In this case, you can see the list of the running container. It is actually running. It's showing me the container is created about a minute ago. The status is up, and the ports that we've exposed is obviously 80 to a TCP, so now it is there. And if you see that this docker container ls is showing me only the container which is currently running, but we just ran a container and exited out of it. So how do we see that the container which is exited out? So you will do docker container ls and -a, and you will see it shows you that, hey, there was a container running, but it was exited about 0 minutes ago. Now in this case, if you point out a couple of things, that we have the container ID, the image name, that is nginx, the command which was ran at the start of the container, the created duration, status, ports, and this is something that you can realize here, guys, that when you run a Docker container, it gives you a name by default. It gives you some random name in order to point out that container, but it would become very tricky when you're actually running a container and you want to actually give it a name. So how do we run a container and give it a name? Let's see that. So to do that, we are going to do docker container, which is this command, and we will do docker container run --publish and publish to port 80, and we'll do a detach so that it runs in the background. And now we are going to give this container a name. We will call it, let's say, nginx web server, okay? And we press enter. Now, what just happened here? Oh, I've missed writing the name of the image, so obviously we want it an nginx container. And you run, oh, it says that the port 80 is already allocated because we just ran the port 80 for the container. So what we are going to do, we are going to give it port 8080 this time, because I'm going to say, hey, run the container on port 8080 because port 80 is now blocked by my previous container. So we run that. All right, I missed it. It should be 8080. Oh, it says that, hey, we are running a container with the same name. So sorry. So let's make it 01. And let's change it back. Port 8080 and press enter. And you see that we have a container running now with web server 01, nginx web server 01. So if we go back to our browser and let's write port 8080, we'll see that there's a container running again on port 8080. And if you go do a docker container ls, you will see that we have two containers. Now one, it was running before on port 80. It has a random name. Now you can see that we are having two containers. One obviously is the one that we just ran with a custom name, and one that we ran previously on port 8080. And you can see that one container is running on port 80 and the other container is running on port 8080. Now a point to remember here, guys, you cannot run multiple containers on the same port. And why is that? That's something we are going to talk about in the future tutorials. But remember that if you get error like this, they're not going to be running on the same port. Now, how do we get inside the container, see what are the logs that are inside the container. Now to do that, we will run a command docker container and logs, and in this case we will write our nginx web server, and we will see the logs inside this. Now to get some logs, let's kind of refresh this container a couple of times. So we refreshed it, and now if you go back and look at logs, oh sorry, it is nginx container 01, my bad. And now you see that we can see the logs which are inside this container. Now if I want to see that what is inside the process running inside the container, so we can actually run the docker container, and we will do top and then the name of the container, in this case nginx web server 01, and you do that, it will show you that hey, right now you're running a process, a command which is nginx-g daemon, and we can actually see what's running inside the container. Now you can always type the docker help in order to get anything for yourself. So you can do docker help and you can find the list of commands which are running there. So now the time is that we are having the container, let's see, docker container ls-a. We see that we are running 4 containers. It's time to delete them. Let's clean them up. To do that, we will do docker container rm, and what we need is, guys, is to put the container ID. So you don't have to write the full container ID. For this, write this. I am going to write 6c6 and enter. Oh, this container is still running, so let's remove the one which is exited. So we have a container which is this. It says exited, which is 266. So let's do it 266, and you see it's deleted. If you do a docker container ls, again, now we see 3 containers, not 4. Why we can delete the one before, which is 66? Because this container, if you see, it's already running. So you can't delete a container which is running, although there's a command which I'll tell you how to do that. But in order to delete a container, you have to first stop it. So you will write docker container stop, and then we'll write 6c6. And now if I go back and do an rm666, you see that we are able to delete it. And if you do ls-a, you can see we have just 2 containers running. Now, this is a way we want to delete the container. So what we will do, we will also stop the container, which is docker container stop 754, which is this one. Sorry, this one. So we'll write 7547, and that happens. And now what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to delete these 2 containers at one go. So I'm going to write docker container rm, and we'll write 05ff and 7547. So you don't have to write docker container rm every time to delete a container. You can actually delete them with one command. So if you do that, and now if I do container ls-a, we do not have any container. So what we just learned, we actually installed Docker, we saw a Docker version, we ran an Nginx container with docker container run command, we went inside the container to see the logs, we ran docker container top to see the process running, and then we successfully removed the container. So that brings us to the end of the session, and now we should focus on the next session, that how do we play around with the containers. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel to get the latest videos on technologies. We will keep posting multiple technologies videos. In the next week, we are going to put videos on AWS and Google Cloud and how to kind of understand these cloud platforms. So stay tuned and be safe. Thank you.
If you haven't subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button to get the latest updates from Qoaching. Hurry up, don't miss it.